I don't have a son. The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, even as I said them to the two RCMP officers standing on my porch in the October rain. The shorter one, Constable Davies, shifted his weight and exchanged a glance with his partner. "Mr. Richard Brennan?" he asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. "That's right. Sir, we need you to come down to the Vancouver General Hospital. There's been a young man brought in, early 20s. He was found unconscious near Stanley Park 3 days ago. No identification. When he woke up this morning, he gave your name as his father." I felt the coffee mug grow cold in my hand. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. I'm 63 years old. I've never been married. I don't have any children." The taller officer, Sergeant Kim, pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. The young man in the hospital bed had dark hair, a strong jawline, and my mother's eyes. My breath caught. "We understand this is confusing, Mr. Brennan," she said gently, but he was quite insistent. "He said his name is Thomas Brennan. He's 22 years old, and you're his father. He knew your address, your profession as a pharmacist, even the name of your pharmacy on Granville Street." My hand trembled as I set down the mug. Thomas. I had a nephew named Thomas, but he lived in Toronto and was only 15. This made no sense. "I'll come with you," I said quietly. "But I'm telling you, there's been a mistake." The drive to VGH was silent, except for the rhythmic squeaking of the windshield wipers. Rain hammered the roof of the cruiser, typical Vancouver autumn weather. My mind raced through possibilities. A scam? Someone who'd researched my life? But why? I lived modestly, had no significant savings beyond my pharmacy and my small house in Kitsilano. At the hospital, they led me through fluorescent-lit corridors that smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. The ICU nurse, a kind-faced woman named Paula, stopped outside room 347. "He's been through quite an ordeal," she said softly. "Severe hypothermia, dehydration, signs of prolonged malnourishment. We found old scars on his back, consistent with abuse. He won't tell us what happened to him." The door opened, and I saw him. The young man from the photo, but in person, there was something hauntingly familiar about the shape of his face, the way his hands rested on the blanket. He looked up as I entered, and his eyes filled with tears. "Dad," he whispered, "you came." I stood frozen in the doorway. "Son, I think there's been some confusion. I don't know you." His face crumpled, and for a moment I saw not a grown man but a frightened child. "Please," he said, "please don't say that. I know what she told you. I know you think I'm dead, but I'm here. I'm alive." The room spun slightly. "What are you talking about?" "Mom, Catherine. She told you I died when I was born, didn't she? That I was stillborn?" I had to sit down. Catherine. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 23 years. Catherine Whitmore and I had dated when I was 40 years old, finally thinking I might build the family I'd always wanted. She was beautiful, vibrant, 10 years younger than me. When she got pregnant 6 months into our relationship, I was terrified but also excited. I proposed. She said yes, but everything changed in her 3rd trimester. She became distant, secretive. She started disappearing for hours without explanation. I found texts on her phone from someone named Derek. When I confronted her, she admitted she'd been seeing him since before she met me. She wasn't sure whose baby it was. The night she went into labor, I drove her to the hospital, my heart breaking but determined to be there. 6 hours later, a doctor I'd never seen before came out to the waiting room. He was young, nervous, wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Brennan," he'd said. "The baby didn't make it. Cord strangulation. Your girlfriend is asking that you not come back to see her. She wants to be alone." I'd stood there in that waiting room, numb, as my entire future crumbled. I never saw Catherine again. She left Vancouver 3 days later. Mutual friends told me she'd moved to Calgary with Derek. I'd thrown myself into my work, bought the pharmacy, and convinced myself I was fine alone. Now, sitting in this hospital room, I looked at this young man who had my mother's eyes. "Tell me everything," I said quietly. Thomas took a shaky breath. "I grew up in Calgary. Mom raised me with Derek. He was cruel. Beat me for any reason or no reason at all. Mom was so deep into drugs by the time I was 5 that she barely noticed. When I was 8, I found my birth certificate in a box in the basement. It said father, Richard Brennan, Vancouver, BC. He paused, wiping his eyes. I asked Mom about you. She screamed at me, said you were dead, said I should never mention your name again. But I didn't believe her. I held on to that birth certificate like it was treasure. Why didn't you contact me sooner? I asked, my voice rough. Derek found the birth certificate when I was 12. He beat me unconscious. When I woke up, he told me if I ever tried to find you, he'd kill me. I believed him. I'd seen what he was capable of. Thomas's hands shook on the blanket. When I turned 18, I ran away. But I had nothing. No money, no education beyond grade 10. I lived on the streets in Calgary for a while, then Edmonton. I was too ashamed to find you like that. I wanted to get clean, get a job, become someone you could be proud of. My throat tightened. What happened 3 days ago? I'd finally saved enough money working construction jobs. I took the bus to Vancouver 2 weeks ago. I was staying at a shelter, planning how to approach you. Then I saw him. Derek? Thomas nodded. At a Tim Hortons on Davie Street. I don't know how he found me. Maybe Mom told him I'd gone to Vancouver. He followed me when I left, chased me into Stanley Park. I ran until I couldn't run anymore. I remember falling, hitting my head on something. Then nothing until I woke up here. Sergeant Kim, who'd been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, if what Thomas is saying is true, we need to investigate. Do you have any documentation from 22 years ago? Hospital records, birth announcements, anything? I nodded slowly. I kept everything. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It's all in a box in my attic. We'll need to see it. And we'll need a DNA test to confirm paternity. Of course. I looked at Thomas, really looked at him. The shape of his nose was like mine, the way his left eyebrow arched slightly higher than his right, just like my father's. But I think I already know what it will say. Over the next week, the truth emerged in pieces, each one more devastating than the last. The DNA test came back. Thomas was my son, 99.9% certainty. My lawyer, Marcus Chen, helped me obtain the hospital records from 22 years ago. The doctor who'd told me my son was dead, Dr. Andrew Morrison, had lost his medical license years earlier for falsifying records and taking bribes. Catherine had paid him $5,000 to tell me the baby died and to forge a death certificate. But the worst discovery came when Constable Davies tracked down Catherine herself, now living in a rundown apartment in Red Deer, Alberta. She was in the late stages of liver disease from decades of alcohol abuse. Derek had left her years ago. In her statement, recorded 2 days before she slipped into a coma, she explained everything. Derek and I had a plan, she said, her voice slurred and weak. The baby was his. We were sure of it. But Derek had a criminal record, couldn't pass a background check for good jobs. Richard was stable, educated, had that pharmacy. We were going to use him for money. But then the baby came out looking just like Richard's baby photos, she continued. Derek was furious. He said we'd get nothing from Richard now, that I'd ruined everything. Dr. Morrison was Derek's cousin. Derek paid him to tell Richard the baby died. We took Thomas and left town. The detective's voice on the recording was carefully neutral. Why did you keep Thomas if you didn't want him? Catherine laughed, a horrible rattling sound. Welfare checks. As long as I had a dependent, the government paid me. When Thomas got old enough to work, Derek made him hand over every paycheck. That boy was nothing but a source of income. I had to leave Marcus's office when he played me that recording. I stood outside in the rain, not caring that I was getting soaked, and wept for the 22 years I'd lost. Thomas was released from the hospital after 10 days. I brought him home to my house, to the guest room I'd hastily prepared. He stood in the doorway, taking it all in, the clean sheets, the dresser, the window overlooking the garden. Is this really okay? He asked quietly. I'm a stranger to you. You're my son, I said firmly. You're not a stranger. You're my son. Those first months were awkward. We were learning each other. I discovered he loved reading, especially science fiction, the same genre I'd devoured at his age. He was brilliant with his hands, could fix anything mechanical. He'd taught himself guitar and would play softly in his room at night. But the trauma ran deep. Nightmares woke him most nights. Loud noises made him flinch. He apologized constantly for everything, as if waiting to be punished. When I raised my voice slightly one day because he'd forgotten to lock the front door, he'd backed into a corner, arms raised protectively. I'd immediately lowered my voice, held up my hands. Thomas, I'm sorry. I won't hurt you. I will never hurt you. It took several minutes before he believed me. I found him a good therapist, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who specialized in complex trauma. Twice a week, Thomas would take the bus to her office in Burnaby. Slowly, incrementally, I began to see changes. The nightmares came less frequently. He stopped flinching at every sudden movement. 3 months after he'd come into my life, Thomas came home from therapy with something like excitement in his eyes. Dr. Okonkwo thinks I should go back to school, he said. Get my high school equivalency, maybe even think about college eventually. I think that's an excellent idea. It's just, he hesitated. It costs money. I can get a job, pay you back. Thomas. I waited until he looked at me. You don't owe me anything. I owe you 22 years. Let me do this. He enrolled in an adult education program. I'd find him at the kitchen table late at night, working through math problems or writing essays. He approached everything with an intensity that broke my heart. This was what he'd been denied all those years. Meanwhile, the legal case moved forward. Derek was arrested trying to cross the border into Washington state. The charges were extensive: child abuse, fraud, extortion. Catherine died before she could stand trial, her liver finally giving out. Derek's trial was in March. Thomas insisted on testifying. I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching my son face the man who'd tormented him for most of his life. Derek was 60 now, gray-haired and pot-bellied, trying to look harmless. Thomas's voice was steady as he described the beatings, the psychological torture, the years of fear. Derek's lawyer tried to discredit him, but the old scars on Thomas's back, the hospital records from numerous childhood accidents, the testimony from neighbors who remembered a frightened, quiet boy, all painted a clear picture. Derek was sentenced to 12 years. Thomas showed no emotion when the verdict was read. That night, I found him in the garden, sitting on the bench under the cherry tree. I thought I'd feel different, he said, like closure or justice or something. But I just feel tired. I sat beside him. Healing isn't a straight line. It's not something a verdict can give you. It's something you build, day by day. He leaned his head on my shoulder, the way I imagined he might have done when he was small if he'd been allowed. I'm glad I found you. I'm glad you found me too, son. In June, Thomas passed his high school equivalency exam with honors. We celebrated at his favorite restaurant, a little Vietnamese place on Commercial Drive. He was glowing, proud of himself, in a way I suspected he'd never been allowed to be. I've been thinking, he said over pho. Dr. Okonkwo suggested I might want to study social work, help kids who went through what I went through. That's a beautiful idea. UBC has a program. It's a lot of money. Student loans would cover some of it. But, Thomas, I reached across the table. I've been alone for 63 years. I have money saved that I never spent because I had no one to spend it on. Let me invest it in your future. Please. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you. You already have. Every day you choose to heal, to move forward, to build a life, you thank me. Thomas started at UBC in September. I'd drive him to campus that first day, watching him walk toward the student center with his backpack, looking young and nervous and hopeful. He turned back once, waved at me. I waved back, my heart so full it hurt. The next 2 years brought continued healing. Thomas made friends, joined a student support group for trauma survivors, even started dating a kind young woman named Jennifer, who was studying to be a teacher. His nightmares became rare. The constant apologies stopped. He began to laugh more easily. On his 25th birthday, we had dinner at my house, just the two of us. I gave him a photo album I'd put together, filled with pictures from the past 3 years. Thomas at his high school equivalency, graduation, Thomas on his first day at UBC, Thomas and Jennifer at the beach, Thomas and me planting tomatoes in the garden. This is us, I said. This is the family we're building. He held the album carefully, looking at each photo. When he got to the last page, he saw what I'd placed there. His original birth certificate, the one he'd found in that Calgary basement at 8 years old and held on to through everything. I thought you should have this, I said. Not hidden in a box. Here, with all our new memories. Thomas closed the album and hugged me tightly. I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. Later that evening, after Thomas had left to meet Jennifer, I sat in my living room thinking about the strange path that had brought us here. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I had a living son, I wouldn't have believed them. If they'd told me what that son had endured, I would have been devastated beyond measure. But here we were, not healed completely, perhaps never completely healed, but healing, building something real and good from the ashes of what had been stolen from us. I thought about all the years I'd believed I was meant to be alone, that fatherhood had been tried and taken from me. I'd been wrong. Fatherhood had been waiting, just taking a different path to reach me. The next morning, Thomas called me. "Dad, I need to tell you something." My heart clenched with familiar fear. "What is it?" "Dr. Okonkwo thinks I'm ready to try reducing my therapy to once a month instead of twice a week. She says I've made incredible progress." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "That's wonderful, son. It's because of you," he said quietly. "Because you gave me a safe place to heal. Because you were patient. Because you loved me even when I was too damaged to know how to love you back properly." "You were never too damaged," I said firmly. "You were hurt. That's not the same thing. And you always knew how to love. You just needed to remember that it was safe to do it." There was a pause, and then he said, "I'm thinking about starting a support group at UBC for students who aged out of foster care or came from abusive homes. Would you help me organize it?" "I'd be honored." We spent the following weeks planning. Thomas put up flyers around campus. I helped him book a room and arrange for pizza at the first meeting. When the night arrived, 12 students showed up, each carrying their own stories of survival. I watched Thomas lead the group, sharing parts of his own story, creating a space where others felt safe to share theirs. This young man who'd been told he was worthless, who'd been beaten and exploited and abandoned, was now helping others find their way through similar darkness. After everyone left, Thomas and I cleaned up the empty pizza boxes and folded chairs. "Thank you for helping tonight," he said. "You did all the real work. I just provided pizza." He smiled. "You provided more than pizza. You provided proof that it's possible to build a family after trauma. Half those kids tonight don't believe anyone will ever really care about them. Seeing us together, seeing that we're making it work even though we lost so many years, it gives them hope." I had to look away, overwhelmed by emotion. "You give me hope too, Thomas. Every single day." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the doctor who'd lied to me 22 years ago, about Catherine's betrayal, about Derek's cruelty. I thought about all the pain that could have been avoided if any of them had made different choices. But I also thought about Thomas's resilience, about the way he'd held on to that birth certificate through years of abuse because he needed to believe there was someone, somewhere, who might love him. I thought about his courage in tracking me down despite his fear, about his determination to heal, about his heart that remained kind despite everything it had been through. Some truths are devastating when you learn them. Finding out I had a son who'd lived a life of suffering while I went about my quiet existence was one of those truths. But that truth also brought with it a gift I never expected to receive this late in life. The chance to be a father, to help someone heal, to build a family, not on the foundation of what should have been, but on what actually is. 6 months later, Thomas brought Jennifer to Sunday dinner, and she was wearing a small diamond ring. They were both beaming. "We're getting married next summer," Thomas announced. "And Dad, I'd like you to be my best man." "Shouldn't that be one of your friends?" I asked, though my heart soared. "You're my best friend," he said simply, "and my father, and the person who showed me what love actually looks like. So yes, it should be you." The wedding was beautiful, small, just close friends and the family we'd built over the past 4 years. When I stood beside Thomas at the altar, watching him marry a woman who loved him for exactly who he was, I thought about the long, winding path that had brought us to this moment. During his vows, Thomas said something that made everyone in the small church cry. He looked at Jennifer and said, "You taught me what it means to be loved romantically. But my dad taught me that I was worthy of being loved at all. Both of you saved my life in different ways." At the reception, Thomas asked me to dance. As we moved awkwardly around the floor to an old song his mother and I used to listen to, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said years ago, about healing not being a straight line. I remember. You were right. There are still hard days. Probably always will be. But the good days outnumber them now. And I have you, and Jennifer, and a life I'm building on purpose instead of just surviving." He looked at me with those eyes, my mother's eyes. "I want you to know that I forgive her. Catherine? He nodded. And Derek too, I think. Not because what they did was okay, but because holding on to that anger was like carrying them with me everywhere I went. I don't want to carry them anymore. I want to be free. I pulled him into a hug right there on the dance floor. You are free, son. You are so incredibly free. The years that followed brought more healing, more growth, more joy than I'd imagined possible. Thomas graduated with his social work degree. He got a job working with at-risk youth in Vancouver's downtown east side. Jennifer had a baby, a little girl they named Eleanor Catherine, after my mother, and yes, after Thomas's mother too, because as he said, she gave me life. Even if she didn't know how to love me, that deserves to be remembered. I became a grandfather at 68. Holding tiny Eleanor in the hospital, seeing Thomas and Jennifer look at her with such fierce protective love, I understood that healing really does continue across generations. Thomas was determined to give his daughter everything he'd been denied, and watching him be gentle and patient and present with her was perhaps the greatest gift of all. Now, as I sit here at 70 years old, looking back on these past 7 years, I think about all the lessons I've learned. I learned that it's never too late to become a father, never too late to build a family. I learned that trauma doesn't define a person, that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds if you have patience and support and love. I learned that the family you build can be just as strong as the family you're born into, sometimes stronger. Thomas and I didn't have his first 22 years together, but we've made the most of every day since. Most importantly, I learned that truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a lie. For 22 years, I believed my son was dead. That lie shaped my life, kept me isolated and afraid to love again. When the truth emerged, it was devastating, but it also set us both free to build something real. If you're reading this and you've experienced betrayal or loss or trauma, know that your story doesn't have to end with that pain. Healing is possible. Connection is possible. Family, in whatever form it takes, is possible. And if you're someone who's made mistakes, who's hurt others, know that the truth will eventually come out. It always does. The lies we tell to protect ourselves, or to get what we want, don't just hurt others. They corrupt everything they touch, spreading pain across years and lives in ways we can't imagine. Choose truth. Choose love. Choose to heal rather than to harm. These choices won't erase the past, but they can build a better future. Thomas calls me every Sunday evening now. We talk about his week, about Eleanor's latest accomplishments, about the kids he's helping at work, about everything and nothing. These conversations are ordinary, mundane even, but they're also miraculous, because for 22 years, I believed they could never happen. Last Sunday, as we were saying goodbye, Thomas said, "Hey Dad, I love you. I love you too, son." "I know," he said. "I've always known. Even when I was that 8-year-old kid in Calgary, holding on to a birth certificate and dreaming about a father who might love me, I knew. Somehow, I knew you would." He was right. From the moment I saw him in that hospital bed, I loved him. Not because of biology alone, but because he was my son. Because despite everything he'd been through, he'd held on to hope. Because he'd chosen to find me, to heal, to build a life. That's the thing about love. It doesn't require perfect circumstances or perfect timing. It just requires truth and courage, and the willingness to show up, day after day, and do the work of building something real. My son is alive. He's thriving. He's teaching others to heal from their own traumas. He's raising a daughter with love and patience, and I get to be part of it all. I don't have a son. I'd told those officers 7 years ago. I was wrong. I have a son, a daughter-in-law, and a granddaughter. I have a family, and every day I get to spend with them is a gift I'll never take for granted. The truth set us free, even when that truth was painful. And in that freedom, we found each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of all those lost years. That's not just my story. That's our story, and it's still being written, one precious day at a time.